We're live from the Mudwater Podcast Studio, Venice, California. And ladies and gentlemen, an international man of mystery we have with us today. He's a surfer, a traveler, a writer, a thinker, a listener, a speaker, a temporary non-drinker. What do you think? That sounds hot, wasn't it?
My man, my man.
Kyle Tierman is in the house. How about that? Now you are a wordsmith, I know, and so that took a little bit of. I had to work on that a little bit.
Dude, you're hired.
Did that work?
You're hired.
Come on,
yeah.
I'm in.
At first, I was like, God, this guy's gonna be reading from paper the whole time, and then he just started swooning me. That was poetry, my friend.
Oh, I couldn't miss. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I almost missed. I got nervous. I could have flubbed it, but here we are. We did it. You know,
I'm so happy.
I'm not reading the whole time. You know.
Are you a musician? I feel like you should be like singer-songwriter. You're from Tennessee. There's something there, man.
I feel like if I drank enough moonshine, I could probably get there.
Yeah.
I think that's usually how singer-songwriters start. Is just drink moonshine and your dog dies or something, and then you get a song, right?
Yeah. Well, if you ever do get into becoming a country singer, you can mark this as the moment.
Oh boy!
Every singer, every star needs an origin story,
gosh.
And this can be yours.
This was it right here. So you would be. What was Elvis's guy? The guy, his manager. You are that. Whatever that guy's name was, you're that now.
Yeah, I believe in you.
We'll have to come up with something cool.
First fan,
Dr. Tierman, Dr. T, or something like that. Man, thanks for being on. We're here. The RO podcast. We're all about intentions, the things we want to do. It's conversations with people who strive to live intentionally. So will you give us, this is kind of existential and big, your thesis, what are you about? You've done a ton, and we're going to talk about that, but what are you about?
What am I about?
Yeah, what are you about? What's your thesis on life? What are you here to do? What are you here intending to do with your life?
Well, I try and... I think I wrote an about page for that. That's why we write about pages, right?
Let's get down to the essence, though.
Yeah, the essence of what I'm all about. What am I all about, man? I think that lately I've been all about copywriting. That's been just as of recent where I've pointed the spotlight of my attention. I think that when you ask what are you about, it's really a question of where are you pointing your attention.
I like that.
Right? And throughout the scope of a human life, you're going to be pointing your attention in all these different areas. But the superpower today is to be able to point it for a long duration in one direction so that you can improve in that area, any given area, whether it's copywriting or being a singer or surfing,
right?
Because I think that that's really gratifying for humans. And the problem that you're trying to solve and are addressing is people being strobe lights.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, God. It's wordsmithing. I mean,
we can't spotlight our attention in one area.
Yeah.
So we're going to be about a bunch of different things throughout our life, and. I actually think that just to pull that question back one layer further, there's the question of what are you about, but there's also the question of what are you performing to be about, which was the big surprise when social media came out, right? Everyone was claiming that these tools were going to allow us to share ourselves authentically. But what they ended up doing is creating a culture of performance where people just share what they think others will like. And if you start to get attention in that area, I think that it can calcify a human path. Yeah. And then even if they are interested in singing or copywriting or surfing, but they're famous for being a frickin' roller skater.
Yeah, right.
They don't feel permission to laterally move throughout different life paths. So I've always, if there's anything that I've been about or anything that I pride myself on, it's living a varied life and following my curiosity and then diving into something and really exploring it, not knowing where it will take me.
Right.
And then moving on to the next one. But yeah, right now, if you're asking what I'm about, I've been focusing quite a bit on copywriting, and we're, we've probably just lost half our listeners there. But but copywriting is interesting because it's a form of storytelling for brand. And I've been a journalist for a long time. 2 years ago, I got hired at Mudwater, and I've come to realize that what copywriting is, it's helping to tell the story of a brand through all of these small tapestries that you are creating week over week over week. And it's a bit like writing a book, but it's writing a book about a brand in all of these different mediums, from what writing is going on the website to what's going in the booklet to what's going on social media to how are you communicating to customers. It's bringing that idea out to the world in the form of a brand called Mudwater.
And I think your content is by far the greatest of any DTC brand, it seems, right now. And so I'm curious, as you do that, are you synthesizing what you're seeing around you, what you're hearing from the creators in the mud community? Are you synthesizing what they're saying, or are you creating your own content, or is it a little bit of both?
We're creating our own content.
And I mean, you personally, like when you hear, you're not hearing what Shane Heath says, and then you're packaging a different way. Are you actually, you're taking some of that, but are you also then, hey, this is Kyle Tierman's spin in general, this is what I think?
I think that it's a bit of both. I mean, Shane, who's the founder of Mudwater, has been, he's a great writer himself. He created a lot of the original copy and tone of the brand. And he has the vision for what Mudwater is and what it's interrupting. Yeah. And then I think that we're pretty aligned on how it is that we can be a part of that conversation. Yeah. Like the way that I really see what we're doing and what copywriting is from the standpoint of what my job is, my job is to help us become relevant in conversations that are happening in culture that we want to be a part of, we want to create art for, and we want to help move along. Yeah. So those conversations are, the first is caffeine addiction. A lot of people are addicted to coffee. Some of them don't want to be. Yeah. And it's an interesting conversation because it's this psychoactive stimulant that nearly all the world is addicted to. So we're running around in these altered states of consciousness, and coffee works great for some people, but it also has side effects for others, like fractured sleep or anxiety. And by the way, I drink coffee from time to time. Yep. But what we want to be a part of shepherding along is this conversation around questioning your relationship to this stimulant. And if you want to continue drinking coffee, hell yeah. Yeah. But don't, we talk about part of our mission being to dethrone coffee. And it's like, that doesn't mean that you kill the king, but but you question the king. Yeah. Like, and the king was always this figure that could never be questioned. Right. But we had, there were in the dark alleyways of the kingdom these jokers, the people who do puppet shows where they would make fun of the king, and then the peasants would laugh because they were bringing about some kind of truth into the world. And I kind of see that as part of our job. Like, hey, we're not mad at coffee. We're just disappointed. We're kind of poking the bear. We're poking fun at it to hopefully allow people to start asking themselves those questions. Yeah. Ultimately, in my mind, and these are my words, it's a conversation about how humans get energy. And asking yourself, are there better ways to get energy for myself, which could include Mudwater, but it could also include breath work. It could include cold plunging. It could include journaling. Yeah. There are myriad ways to get energy, but our culture has just globbed onto one that sort of takes you from level 0 to level 10 in the matter of a few minutes every single morning.
And no one, what's crazy about it, no one questions it. I had not, so, I am a Mudwater drinker. I mean, it's, and I was a 5 or 6 cups of coffee a day guy. And without even realizing that by noon I was shaking, literally, physically, my hands were shaking without really attributing it to coffee. I just like the ritual of coffee or whatever it was. But I like what you guys are doing in making somebody question that. And to your point on branding, like you look at all the brand archetypes, the jester archetype is one of the most powerful because, to your point, it's the only person that could speak truth to the king in the kingdom. And you guys do such a brilliant job of that. I mean, it's really, really amazing in doing that. And so you've heard, I'm sure you see, you hear people talk about it. Like, has that been an effective venture for Mudwater and how you guys have approached that? And you hear stories and that kind of stuff. Has it been an effective, fruitful thing as people are kind of questioning that relationship?
Yeah, I think that one line I've heard since working at Mudwater is to be successful, you need relevance and differentiation. And my whole life, I consider myself a creative. I've worked on a lot of documentaries. I've done a lot of writing, done a lot of podcasting. And I think that I've always just gone after curiosity and gone after how can I be different? What can I learn? Which I think is, it's important, especially as you're starting out, to just follow your curiosity because you don't want to become confined to what culture tells you is okay to talk about and create art around. Because then you're just one-dimensional, and you don't become an original and brave version of yourself. But I think that often creatives, and I would put myself in this category, can go too far off of relevance. So you're creating art that's not really relevant to solving a problem or being part of a conversation that really impacts someone's life. So what I think that Shane is uniquely gifted at is finding what that line is between what is relevant, what is a conversation that's already happening, and how can we add our own art to that conversation to be different. That's a real dance. But if you hit it, you'll create more change than you ever thought possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so where did the curiosity come from? I watched you did a TED Talk when you were 21. Is that right?
Yeah.
And which was great. And Kyle was shirtless on stage. It was on. It was such a. I mean, again, talk about an interesting topic. Was how do you mobilize surfers around the banking industry effectively? And it was beautiful. And you talked about the great success you had there, but that wasn't your first. I assume that wasn't your first, toe dip into curiosity and following your curiosities. Where did that come from? Like, I have a 14-year-old son. Like, how would you advise me as a dad? Hey, Harrison, here's how you follow your curiosities. Like, what is that?
I grew up in a place called Santa Cruz. It's a little surf town in Northern California, and surfing is very much a religion there. To be a surfer is to be a leaf floating down a stream. But like leaves, it's impossible to get out of that stream. Very difficult. And I saw a lot of my peers and a lot of people just a bit older than me dedicate their lives, embed their identities in surfing and get really fucking good at surfing. And then they fell off a cliff in their 30s, whether they became drug addicted or they lost all their sponsors or they couldn't transition into a normal job because they didn't have those skills. They hadn't been building those skills. And that scared the hell out of me. And I think my mom also saw pretty early on that you can't just rely on that one skill. So she always encouraged me to be finding other things that I found interesting and go after them. And I didn't know it at the time, but I think that diversifying your interests, it diversifies your identity. And therefore, when one thing doesn't work out, you don't crumble. So I always saw curiosity. I don't know if I saw it at the time. I was just curious about other stuff. And I was curious about really wanting to know how the world worked. Like I remember my mom said that when I was a little kid, she would put me in the back of the car in a car seat, and I would throw a tantrum if she wouldn't tell me where we were going and why.
Right.
I just wanted to know where we were. I mean, even still, when I get to a new place, I need to look at a map of that place.
Interesting.
And I just need to know.
Yeah.
So I think that now I see that as, both being encouraged by my mom, probably some innate desire, and I think a real path to psychological durability, which I don't think that I'm necessarily the most durable of brains, but I do think that just getting interested in a bunch of different shit can really help once you hit adulthood.
It seems like maybe it's always been hard to do that, but it seems like right now, again, with a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, people are so big right now on specialization. Oh, you got whether it's a sport. Oh, you specialize in this, or even like, and they're asking like middle schools, hey, what do you think you're gonna major in college? Like, what? I have no idea. And that seems like that's an even harder thing right now, to have that diversity of thought and be interested in a bunch of things. And I think it's probably, as a parent, and in some ways it's probably a form of control, trying to channel them towards something where you feel like you're doing a good job with your kid. But what a valuable thing for them to just be like, no, just open up your mind, just look at a bunch of different stuff. That seems like that's a super valuable lesson.
Yeah, and learn how to ask questions. And I also think that I have always I get off on poking the bear.
Yeah.
Like ever since I was a kid, if there was something I shouldn't ask, or there was a topic that I shouldn't go near,
right,
I would just gravitate towards it like a magnet. I mean, I fucking love comedy for that reason. Yeah. Like that is, you're just speaking truth, and you're opening it up, and I think that's so important. Yeah. Because there's a lot of lying out in the world.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a lot of lying, and there's a lot of stories that serve corporations but aren't necessarily true.
Yep.
And they shape culture, and you can get destroyed if you question those stories. But I've always kind of gravitated towards that risk. And as I become more literate in that, and as I found podcasting, I just found that to be the perfect medium for me to explore.
Well, I was going to ask you about podcasting. You've done over 300 podcasts since 2016 across two different. I know you do the Mud podcast, Trends with Benefits, and the Kyle Tierman Show. Over 300 across both of those?
Yeah.
And listening to them, and I encourage everybody listening to listen to those, because you are, one thing that really stood out, and you said it just a second ago, you are great about asking questions. You're a very gifted conversationalist. And so hearing you ask those questions, and it also falls in line with, you have a bunch of different people on there. I mean, it's really fun to listen to the people you have on there talking about a litany of topics. Tell me a little bit about that. Why are you doing so many podcasts? How did that start? What are you trying to accomplish with that? It's a really fascinating thing.
Thanks. Yeah, I started my own podcast in 2016 because podcasting was the medium that I was consuming most. I was doing a bunch of YouTube videos at the time, like just vlog shit, and it was just vapid as hell, and it was in an ecosystem of vapidity, and it's just...
It sounds like a band name, Ecosystem of Vapidity.
Ecosystem of Vapidity,
that's a good band name.
It was just like this fucking malaria-infested swamp of narcissism.
What a great line.
And... that's the selfie, right? It's just
right.
Check me out. And I've always been committed to working in media. I just feel like I like storytelling, and I've dabbled in a bunch of different mediums. But I was making these YouTube videos. It was going pretty well. A lot of it was about surfing. A lot of it was about I did a series where I chronicled my efforts to make it into the Mavericks Big Wave competition in Northern California. and which I did, was able to get on that list and super excited about it. It took a lot of work and training and time and effort. But I felt like it was a lot about clickbait and grabbing your attention with some crazy shit and not offering anything of real value and just having it be so about me. I was like, I'm 22.
Yeah.
I should be keeping my mouth shut at this time of my life.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like, you don't know shit.
Yeah, exactly.
That you're 22.
Right.
And you should be asking questions right now.
Yeah.
Around that time, I was listening to a lot of Tim Ferriss, a lot of Rogan. My mind was just being blown open with these guests. And I would go up and surf these waves and be listening to podcasts the whole time. And sometimes I would get to the spot and I would still stay in my car and keep listening to the podcast. I was like, this is just so good. I would like go to hang out with friends and go get drinks, and I would just stay in my car for like 20 minutes, half an hour longer. Because I was like, this is the most interesting conversation that I've ever been a part of.
Yeah.
And podcasting is so unique in that way because it makes you feel like you are part of a conversation.
Yeah.
So I was telling my friend Shane, founder of Mudwater, about this, and he's like, dude, do it. Do it. You would love podcasting. Made me a logo in a day,
No way.
put it up there, and initially I started bringing on big wave surfers, guys who I was out in the lineup with at Mavericks, and I would bring them on after the surf sessions, and it was a form of peer journalism. Like we would talk about, man, what was it like to get caught inside on that big one that rolled through, or that was such a sick one you got. And I found that it was just fun and unique because it wasn't really an outsider looking in on this subculture. I was inside it and I could talk about it myself. And then I realized that podcasting is kind of the Wild West. You can create whatever format you want. We're still exploring it. It's a unique medium in that you don't need to be looking at a screen while you're consuming it. And the producer and the creator of the podcast has a lot of room to just go and ask questions and make it interesting. So there were a lot of issues that I personally was curious about that I never felt permission to explore. Yeah. One being psychedelics, one being sex education, which was a big theme of my podcast. I would have sex educators on and like dominatrix and like porn stars and like relationship coaches, like just stuff that I could now ask questions about. Yeah. And I didn't need to be seen as the expert on it. Yeah. So I started having these people on. I fumbled my way through a few interviews. But I found that it was always really gratifying for me at the end. It was also, it's a little high stakes in that you can't do a lot of like, sorry, that didn't work. Okay, let's try again. Like you and I are fucking rolling now, right? Yeah, we don't have much. And so there's a little bit of like, ooh, all right, let's get this going. And I was just learning really quickly. And I was getting information that most of the time I would have to pay for. Right. That's the cool thing about podcasting is you get an expert on and you're like, hey, you want to come on my show? And they're like, great. And then you're thinking the whole time, this would be hundreds of dollars to get this information from you as a coach, but you're just giving it to me and to the audience now for free. And it's just a really beautiful thing. Like usually people feel good about that exchange of ideas afterwards. Through the process of doing 300 plus episodes on my own show, I started to gain a little audience of mostly surfers who were also intellectually curious in other topics. Yeah. And I think that one of the most beautiful aspects to the whole experience of doing my own show is that I've had a chance to meet some of my best friends who started out as podcast listeners. That's cool. And these are guys who, some of them lived in other states and they invited me out to their ranch or to their wave or, and they're like, dude, let's connect. We are brothers from another mother.
Right.
And it's so wild, man. I've had a few experiences with guys who I now consider some of my closest friends. I'll walk into their house and they have all the same books as I do. And they'll have, a lot of the same parallel stories as I do. I'm just really grateful to say that I have a solid group of friends, solid group of like-minded people that I've been able to develop as a result of putting this little beacon out there.
And I would assume that that's not something you expected to have come upon, like to make friends in putting out a podcast. There's stuff you were interested in, right? I mean, I assume that's kind of one of the unintended benefits or joys of the whole thing.
Oh yeah. I never thought that I would, that would happen. I never thought so much.
Yeah.
But that's what's beautiful about that medium is it just busts you into these new worlds that you never thought were possible.
Right.
I was never planning on being a writer either before I started podcasting. And then I started interviewing, specifically, I became friends with a guy named Chris Ryan who wrote a best-selling book called Sex at Dawn, wrote another one called Civilized to Death. And he really took me under his wing and taught me a lot about writing.
Yeah.
And it was through that experience and through that relationship that I realized that's how I want to spend my time. That's a skill that I want to get good at. That really is, for someone who wants to figure out what the fuck is going on and then articulate it, writing is the career for you, which led me into now copywriting for Mudwater.
Right.
And it's just been a beautiful and circuitous path.
Right. Well, it seems, given your curiosity and your focus, and I want you to correct me because I'm probably wrong here. It seems like given that curiosity and even starting the podcast out, hey, I'm just curious to hear things. It's not like you said, hey, I want to go hit top 5 on Spotify, on the Spotify charts. Has it been discouraging? Have you had moments of discouragement? Like you don't seem like someone who really gets down much just because you are curious. So maybe 2 questions. One, do you get discouraged in any of that pursuit? And secondly, if you do, like, what do you do? How do you bust out of that? And how do you stay focused on a larger goal?
Yeah, man, for sure. I get depressed as hell.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, it's no good. It's no good at all. I think that being a writer specifically can be a very lonely pursuit. It's a very lonely and solitary pursuit. And I think that being a creator, to come up with really good stuff, it takes spending time alone with your thoughts and in those uncomfortable feelings to birth something good. But I think that it also is really important for me to be around people and shucking and jiving and having conversations.
Yeah.
So for me, podcasting has always felt like the joy of it has always been in the conversation.
Yeah.
And I've always taken it as such. I've always, from the very beginning, I was very clear in that my goal is not to create a top 5 podcast.
Yeah.
My goal is to be here with guests and have conversations that I really dig.
Yeah.
And I've always kept that. And this is one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah.
Just, we're jamming.
Right.
We're jamming on the mic.
That's right.
I think that, what one definition of burnout that I heard recently is when you're putting effort into something and you're not seeing returns on it. And I think that happens to it can happen to a lot of people, but it can happen to a lot of creatives, which also can get you down. You are creating, at the end of the day, if you're a professional creative, you are creating media for other people.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel good if a lot of people aren't digging your shit.
Right.
So I could play the card of like, it's all for me and it's just about being in the present moment, which is partly true. I think you don't want to externalize you don't want to keep your sense of self-worth externally located, but you need to be aware of the audience if you want to make any kind of career out of it.
Yeah.
So for me, for example, I now produce podcasts on my own show pretty infrequently because I went from going for it, building up a bit of an audience. You know, it kind of felt like these embers were starting to crackle and there was a little fire going and we had sponsors and it was like, oh, this is epic, this is epic. But at the end of the day, it was all, I was on the outside of the system. It was all my own thing. It stopped the second I stopped and it didn't really feel like it was continuing to build in the way that I hoped it would.
Yeah.
And then I had the opportunity to start working at Mudwater, where, you know, albeit there are more confines on my creativity because I'm working within the confines of a brand, still a pretty darn creative brand. Yeah. But, you know, I wrote these booklets that will go out to you in your Mudwater.
I love them.
You know, your Mudwater starter kit. Yeah. And it's kind of like a small Bible on like, these are all the things that we care about. Yeah. I mean, those go out to around 1,000 people a day.
Wow.
Like that feels good to know that my words and my jokes are reaching that amount of people. Like that feels really good.
But in that, but without your name at the bottom of it. I mean, is there a challenge to that? I mean, it feels good when someone knows that it was you. People are laughing at the jokes, but it feels really good when they know you're the one that makes the jokes, right? So that does require a certain level of selflessness as well, right?
Yeah, well, this is like the whole writer's thing of like, how much do you ghostwrite?
Yeah.
You know, because ghostwriting is usually where like a lot of the money is, right?
Yeah,
like
of course.
Copywriting or like ghostwrite a book for someone super famous, and that's where that's where you'll make money, but no one will know who your fucking name is. And I think that it's a balance, you know, and I definitely still do feel that ping of like, I just want to put some of my own stuff out there with my own name. Right. And I do. But I feel incredibly grateful that at the job of Mudwater, I'm surrounded by a team of really skilled creatives. Yeah. So I'm learning a ton. I'm part of this system that's creating on a larger scale. Right. I'm skill building. And I also, I feel that if I were to, you know, it's like that saying, like you're the medium of the 5 people you surround yourself with most. Right. Like, I feel like I'm surrounding myself with some really great people right now. And I think I've made a few mistakes in the past in my career by being too obsessive about being like front and center and getting my name out there and being the guy. Yeah. Whereas that's not the move. You know, it's so much better to just see how you can be helpful to a greater vision. Right. And then it starts to kind of come together more. And if fame comes, cool, but I don't think that fame should ever be someone's goal.
And the people who, I mean, you hear it from people all the time, the people whose that was their goal, it's so quick, it's so fleeting, all of a sudden, like, please stop bothering me at dinner, right? And it's a good thing that's not the goal, because it really is such a disappointing thing from anybody who will tell you who's famous, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's a challenging thing. What's interesting too, I've found, I don't know if you found this, as you've focusing on like, hey, let's elevate the brand, let's elevate as a team. That's when you can get away from that selflessness. Like, paradoxically, that's where you start rising, right? Is when you can actually take your focus off yourself, then you actually start rising yourself. It's an interesting thing. Yeah,
I think that's just maturity, and it's something that I'm going through. I go through on a weekly basis, man, because fuckload of tedium working in a brand.
Yeah, right.
You know,
like
exactly. A lot of shit.
How do I say this differently? Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, sure.
You know, man, like starting a company, there's a lot of days where you're doing things that you really don't want to be doing and feel stupid and feel below you. Yeah. And I need to check myself a lot. And it's funny because when I do just get into the mindset of like, you know what, I'm just going to do this thing to the best of my ability. And I'm really going to just put my time and attention into it. Even if my initial thought is like, this is fucking stupid. This should be going to someone else. Right. those are some of the tasks that I enjoy most.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's this weird Zen
Right.
thing to it. You know,
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
like, you're taking all these weird little tasks, and you're like, I feel like a sensei right now, and it's like, it's not this is just like, it's just sand. Like
Yeah.
the sand will be blown away tomorrow, but I'm doing it because it's important
Right.
to do my best here.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas if it's a project that came from me, and I'm like, this is a fucking brilliant idea. This should be a new campaign. It's usually just rife with suffering from beginning to end, because you're like, no, that's not the way I wanted it. Like, then this person's trying to tear it down, and it's this assault on my identity, and like, it ends up, and we're just like, well, fuck it, I'm over it. Right? Like, so you're screwed. You're screwed there too.
Right. Exactly.
So I think that one thing that I'm really learning is that ability to hold an idea almost like it's sand in the palm of your hand. That's good. You know, and if you squeeze the sand, it just falls right through. And you know, it gets back to energy levels. Like a huge amount of my job I see as my job really is putting thoughts down on paper.
Yeah.
It's about getting my mind right before I do that.
Hmm.
Otherwise, I just go through these crazy energy swings from like sort of manic to depressed to frustrated.
Yeah.
But if I'm working out a lot,
Yeah.
that really helps. If I'm meditating, that really helps. I'm getting enough sleep, it really helps. But it's funny, man. I mean, I feel like I need to train and build healthy habits for my job more even than I had to when I was training to surf big waves.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And you're one of the guys there. You were him doing it at that time, right? I mean, and so to the amount it requires of you to prepare yourself to do that. That's pretty extraordinary. So we say at RO, we say we're about less screen time and more real life. So focusing on the back half of that statement, that more real life, like to Kyle Tierman, what does more real life look like to you?
Man, for me lately, it's been a lot of spearfishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I've been getting super into
Tell me about that.
diving here in Los Angeles. We have great blue water spearfishing, great kelp beds, real beautiful, healthy, vibrant. I've been into hunting for the last 5 or 6 years, and I go through these stints where I can take hunting trips, and I feel like I'm really getting to know the lay of the land better and building skills. But in LA, there ain't a lot of hunting. So I'll go on these huge hiatuses from hunting, and I'm gonna be in LA for the foreseeable future. So I was like, shit, like this is such a fun, cool thing that I felt like I was making progress in. You know, like the pursuit of an animal, needing to really focus your attention. Needing to take responsibility for the meat that you're eating, getting to share that with friends. Like it was this whole world that I felt like I was dipping into, and then it stopped when I moved to LA. And a buddy of mine who I really respect, this older guy named Randy, who he's just this guy who, whenever I feel lost, I hang out with Randy. He's a school teacher who is this badass spear fisherman. He's an amateur mycologist.
Wow.
He volunteers with local organizations around town. He's got this little house a few blocks away from the beach with abalone shells everywhere, like happy family. And you're just like, you got it figured out, man. You have your priorities set. When I moved down to LA, he all but took me by the shoulder and was like, this is the spot for spearfishing.
Wow.
Most people don't know, but Southern California has sick.
That's amazing. I would have never
spearfishing.
known or guessed that.
Yeah, so we have bluefin tuna. We have some of the most insane pelagic hunting out there. And spearfishing is a form of hunting. You know, that you are hunting underwater.
Yeah.
It's high stakes. You're holding your breath. You're getting to know this ecosystem that's right below the surface. And I've just been digging it, man. I'm still learning, for sure, but I've got a couple buddies who live in the neighborhood, and we wake up early and we go dive, and shoot some fish and make tacos that night.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That does sound like good real life.
That's been real life for me,
That's
man.
amazing. Real quick question before I ask my last one. You've been on 1 year no beer. You're several months into 1 year no beer. Quick funny side story. Heath Wilson, my co-founder, he and I were toying around with this idea of, I think he owns No Beer for a Year or something like that, the domain right now. So it began before we started RO. We were talking about betterment, doing stuff, and it began with a year of no beer, and then it transitioned into RO. But so kind of funny. That's your journey right now. How's that been? You dry for 2 months?
I think I'm on month 3 now.
Month 3.
Yeah, month 3.
Has it gotten better? Has it been fine?
It's been fine. I'm on the virgin drinks whenever I go out to get drinks with friends. I like that. It's a little soda water, lime, and bitters, or ask the bartender to make you a virgin, and usually it's a hell of a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
I've been enjoying it just to sort of clean the slate a bit and get a bit more curious about my relationship with alcohol.
Yeah.
So I've enjoyed it. One of the cool kind of unexpected things was that I decided to go a year no beer, and I posted something on Instagram that said, "Hey, I'm planning to do 1 year no beer. If anyone wants to join, they can."
Yeah.
And the post just kind of blew up, and there were hundreds of comments in this, and people were like, "Dude, I've always wanted to do this. Let's make it happen." So I started this Telegram group message, and we have 80 people in there.
That's amazing.
Who all decided to join on this 1 year no beer challenge.
It's like people need whether it's the confidence of seeing somebody else do it, or it's like you're giving strength to others by just suggesting it, right? I mean, it's such an interesting concept. I mean, and obviously not just for not drinking for a year, but for a lot of things, people just need the confidence to know that they can do it too if someone else is.
Yeah, I think that the model of community and like my buddy said he's going to show up at 6 a.m. tomorrow to go spearfishing. I'm going to be there whether or not I want to do it.
Right.
Whereas if I'm just relying on my own motivation, I'm a hell of a lot likely to do it. So I think that if people want to change in their life, getting a small group together is the most effective way to do it.
That's really good. That's really, really good. All right, last question. 3 things that someone listening today, they could go enact today, whether it's a belief or an action or something. What are 3 things you would tell just average Joe or Jane listener?
Yeah, man. I would say you should start reading poetry.
Ooh.
Yep.
Anyone come to mind? Any?
Ross Gay. Ross Gay is a great poet, and he has a book of short essays that I'll recommend called The Book of Delights, and he's going to be a guest on the Trends of Benefits podcast.
Oh, cool.
But the concept of the book is he wrote about one delight every day for a year.
Wow.
And what you begin to learn through reading these little poetic essays is that your perception of reality is largely determined by what you choose to focus on. Wow. And I think that poetry is a really great way to help you notice.
Yeah, I love that. God, that's really good. Your perception of reality. Say it one more time. It's so good.
You got the recording. Yeah, your perception of reality is determined by what you focus on.
Determined by which. That's so good.
Yeah. So I'd recommend The Book of Delights by Ross Gay. I would say that I think that it's this is something that just happened to me, but I got into a fight with someone last week, and I was just pissed about the way that they acted, and I felt like I was righteous and right in the moment, and I sort of, I said something that was, I felt fucking right on, but probably a little vicious. And I spent all weekend just building stories around why they were wrong and I was right. And it kind of kept me up at night. For a couple nights, I was just, that pisses me off. And I was just building these arguments against them. And that's kind of what I do as a writer, is I'm professionally building arguments and telling stories. So if that spotlight goes in the wrong direction, it can be pretty detrimental to my mental health.
Yeah, right.
And I just, something sort of, it was funny, man. It was like I was driving home and a song came on that's just like, I just like the song. It's just kind of like a sweet, good song. And I realized that that my feelings were hurt. I was like, and it moved. And I was like, fuck, my feelings are hurt right now. Like, I don't like that. And I got home and I just said, I sent them a text and was like, my feelings are hurt about this. And this is how was my, this was my perception of what happened. I apologize. It wasn't my intention to be mean and vicious towards you. And they sent back the nicest voice memo to me, like just saying how much they appreciated that. And I feel like we now have a closer relationship as a result of that. So my task for anyone listening is just to be first in that. Just be first in reaching out. And it's harder to do. It's hard to do because it feels a bit like you're just blindly jumping forward. Yeah. And it doesn't always come out the exact way that you want, but I think that we could save ourselves and other people a lot of grief and feel a lot more connected if we just were first.
Man, I like what an interesting part of that story that jumps out to me is what preceded that beautiful moment was an ugly moment, but both of which required you to be genuine and real. So you were, that sucks, but you wouldn't have that bond now if you weren't. I don't know if you would replay it the exact same way you did, but you were real and genuine in that first part. And so that's how stuff gets really forged, is in that fire. So it required the ugly stuff for the beautiful stuff to appear. That's an interesting piece of that.
Yeah. So I guess we need one more.
Yeah,
one more. So we got spearfishing. We got being first.
Read poetry was first. Read
poetry.
Yeah.
I haven't told people to go spearfishing.
They could. That could be go spearfishing.
Yeah, man, get in the water. That's the third
one.
Water. Get in the water. Whatever body of water is closest to you. I think that it's the fastest way to change your state of mind. I think that we often try and use our minds to change our state of mind, when really you gotta use your body to change your state of mind.
Dang. Dropping some bombs on us, son. That's great. I love that.
It must be the mud water.
Bro, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being on. This is awesome. This is you can see my note page, but it's riddled with notes, and so I'm pumped for people to hear this. All right, give me a quick commercial on anything you want to commercial on, whether it's Mudwater, Kyle Tierman. Give me everything. If people want to hear from you, connect with you, what do they do?
Yeah, check out the Trends with Benefits podcast. Yeah. And I'm on most of the socials. I do uninstall Instagram for long periods of time.
Nice. It's a good practice.
But I still will post on there every now and again. But stay on Instagram. Stay off Instagram. Just listen to the podcast.
I like that.
That's one of the forms of media that doesn't destroy your mind and turn you into one of the narcissistic swamp dwellers.
Well, bro, you're the best. Thank you. Appreciate it, Kyle.
Thank you,
man.
So you just flew in from Tennessee.
Tennessee. I flew in. I woke up at 4:01 this morning, so I'm feeling good.
Feeling good.
I'm amped up on mud water. I'm feeling great.
Yeah.
It's the best.
Nice, man. So here's a question. You're starting this company.
Yeah.
How, and it's sort of it's about digital addiction. We can talk about the semantics of the word addiction,
Right.
and if we are in a digital addiction crisis. But how has your digital addiction shifted trying to build a startup?
It is that's a balance, because I mean all this started, you talk about, which I love, you to Mudwater, they talk about just examining your relationship with coffee. It's the same thing. Like I had to take a step back a few years ago, many steps back, and this is like, I'm like the 42-year-old dad. I got a 14-year-old, 12-year-old, and so this all started really as a dad, and that's when it like really spotlighted for me. It's like I'm freaking not present with my kids. I mean, I was. So take it back. When my son was 5, my son's 14 now. My son was 5. He was playing soccer, and it was his first season. He's the greatest kid in the world, and it was just a horrendous soccer player. I mean, he just was not a good soccer player. Just sweetest kid in the world. He's great, but not a great soccer player.
He's gonna see this years
later.
later.
Oh no,
like, Dad.
He's told me he's not scarred from the story I'm about to say, but yeah, there's got to be some scarring there from it, even in the retailing.
I don't know. Maybe it would be more scarring for you to tell him he's great the whole time, when really he wasn't. You give him truth.
I didn't tell him when he was 5 he wasn't good at soccer. In retrospect, I think he's probably safer now, 9 years down the road. But he's, so you have this moment. He's playing his soccer season. He was the last kid on the team to score a goal. No one, he's the last kid. He hadn't scored a goal. So all of a sudden, playing this game, and it's like this cinematic moment arises. And so it's my son Harrison, the soccer ball, the goalie, the goal.
Yeah, John Williams started playing this orchestra in the background.
Exactly. It's James Horner. John Williams couldn't do it for us, but John Williams. Yeah. Hans Zimmer couldn't do it either. So he rears back his leg, Harrison does. He kicks the ball, and it's in slow motion. You see the ball end over end between the goalie's legs into the back of the net, and this is a beautiful moment. The crowd goes wild because they know he's the last kid to score. His coach goes and grabs him, lifts him up, and what's the first thing that he does? Harrison, the very first thing he does is he turns to the sidelines to make eye contact with Dad, share this great moment with me, right? Beautiful moment. Well, the problem is that I missed the entire thing. I was looking down at my phone at a group text or whatever the heck it was, and I totally missed that moment. And so, when we're looking at, so the impetus for starting this is I want to make sure other dads don't tell that story. I want to make sure other moms don't tell that story. I want to make sure that when people are out spearfishing, they're, fully present, talking with each other after a good fish. You know what I mean? Like, so, but in doing it, to your question, it still requires a bunch. We're still running ads on Instagram. We're posting on social media, and there's an interesting dopamine hit from getting a fun new email. You know what I mean? As silly as that sounds, getting a cool new email is a lot more interesting sometimes than sitting at a family dinner.
Yeah, well, you're getting a kind of gratification, and
sure.
Then you get addicted to those small dopamine hits rather than what we'd been, the human brain was trained to do for hundreds of thousands of years, which is work arduously and then get a bigger dopamine hit down the line. We found water.
Yeah, exactly. It's totally
we
right.
took down the saber-toothed tiger, right? Whereas now we expect it every 15 minutes, and we get depressed if we don't feel it.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, get yourself out into nature for a few days. Like, it's crazy, the digital addiction, the phantom rings, and how you'll just be reaching for your pocket, like, my precious. Like,
so true.
Those first few days, but if you can get through it, it gives way to a much more pristine and beautiful landscape of reality, which I think that you are helping inch humanity along towards.
Well, we hope so. And I did something a couple years ago, and I don't want to brag or pat myself too hard on the back, but it's something pretty heroic. I went on a walk without my phone. So it's, again, I don't mean to brag.
Cue John Williams again.
It was John Williams again.
He was there for you.
So this but I go on this 45.
Unfortunately, your son Harrison was looking at his when you turned to him and looked for gratification.
Full cats in the cradle scenario.
Yeah,
here. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So I go on this walk and I don't have my phone, and two hilarious things happened. One of them, I was so freaking bored for 20 minutes. I was like, oh, this is terrible. I'm going to go. And then like minute 21. I was like, I started thinking creatively. I started having some great thoughts. It was amazing. 45 minutes in, I see my wife's car driving around our neighborhood, scouring the neighborhood for me, just sure I was dead because she couldn't reach me for 45 minutes. And so it's funny, like you have this, these, to your point, you get out in nature and it really does clear the mind. It takes a little bit of time. You got to cleanse yourself just a little bit. For me, there's a study, there's a woman named Gloria Mark who says that it takes 23 minutes and 15 seconds to refocus after you've been distracted. So we live in this world of continuous partial attention and we're never fully there. And so it probably took about 23 minutes for me to settle into this. But again, the downside of it, because we're so used to having our phones, is my wife thought I was dead because she didn't respond 40 minutes.
Well, that's a real reason why people never leave their phones at home, is this perception that an emergency is going to hit.
Yes.
Even though the emergency's never happened in your life, ever, it's going to hit when you leave your phone at home for an hour.
Yes.
And I think it's that, for me, a lot of times, is the thought that I have to bring my phone with me in the car, bring it on the hike. It's like, I wonder if that is your brain creating a story that will be in service of the dopamine hit.
Oh, that's interesting.
I mean, that's like full addiction storytelling. Well, I need this because it's for my survival.
Yeah.
And often that's why I'll bring it, and then I'm just using it while I'm doing the thing that I was not planning on doing. I'm on the hike, But I think that getting through the statistics of how unlikely it is for that emergency to happen would be helpful.
I had a friend whose parents for years had an alarm system at their house, and they paid $12 a month for 40 years or something like that. And the dad said, he goes, one day, if we ever get broken into, he goes, I'm going to walk up to that thief and shake his hand and say, we've been waiting 40 years for you to break in. Welcome to our home. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing. Yeah, it's this like something catastrophic is going to happen if we're away from our phones. And so this to us is where and again, don't get me wrong, I freaking love my phone, never getting rid of it. It's great. It does a lot of cool things. My grandfather passed away last year. He's in Arizona. I was in Georgia at the time, and we're FaceTiming, an hour before he passed away. How cool is that a smartphone enabled that? However, at family dinner, if I'm talking with my daughter and I pick up my phone, all of a sudden I've lost that moment. Her vulnerability completely shuts down. She's less willing the next time to open up to me because she remembers what happened that time. And so what we're analyzing here as a company, and what we're trying to get to is not the curing the ills of social media, but getting to the core relationship that we have with our phone that says we need to have our phone with us all the time. 91% of Americans have their phones with them 24 hours a day, which is a crazy statistic. At the same time, like 63% of people are trying to reduce their phone usage. But to your point, if I have it with me, I will use it no matter where I am. And so it's this kind of, I define distraction as anything that gets in the way of our intentions. I want to be right now, I want to be with Kyle sitting here talking, right? And
I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah,
but,
will you repeat that? Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
Well, and so we got to get to this core relationship that says we need to have it with us all the time, because we all know, without a doubt, whether we know it explicitly or implicitly, that environment's always stronger than willpower. So if my environment is not set up for the things that I want for myself, if I'm relying on my willpower is gonna lose every single time, and environment will always trump that.
Yeah. You know who Sam Harris is?
Yeah, of course.
Right. So he said something that blew my head off. I was listening to his Waking Up app, and he said, we always talk about time being our most valuable asset. But really, attention is our most valuable asset.
That's so true.
Because you could be, taking vacation on that beach in Indonesia, and you have all the time, and you've really mapped it out perfectly so that you can have this relaxed state. But if you're in the prison of discursive thoughts, and you can't focus your attention on where you want to be, you've lost. You've lost already.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the people that brought about these devices over the past 15 years had really, they had very immature understandings of human psychology, or they had credulous understanding of human psychology. They
Yeah.
didn't, we thought they were going to do one thing. And until pretty recently, Facebook was unabashedly saying that they were connecting the world.
Yeah.
But so often, very smart people can come up with these ideas and it does the exact opposite as what they think it's going to do.
Yeah.
That is just crazy to think about.
Yeah.
And now it's sort of up to us because as these systems, hopefully the next generation will be more literate. They'll start to see social media kind of like maybe we see junk food now.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Ooh, all right. Like that's something that we all know is bad for us, and maybe you can do it sometimes. But right now we're sort of in this guerrilla battle where we need to figure out tools for ourselves if we want to get anything done.
Yeah.
And everyone is fighting this battle.
Well, and it's because it's with us all the time. And I think that 5 years ago, we'd need to convince somebody that, hey, this is detrimental to the things that you want for your life. I don't think you have to convince many people right now that your phone is probably in the way of what's most important to you. You can go to any restaurant, any great restaurant, and see people on a date night looking at their phones. It is getting in, because no one would go describe, hey, what do you want for this date night? No one would say it'd be awesome if I could go 3 levels up on Candy Crush at dinner. That'd be awesome, right?
Yeah.
They would say, no, I want to connect with my partner. I want to connect with the person that I'm with. And again, but the problem is, so I don't know. I guess my point there is that awareness isn't necessarily the issue, is that these things are stronger than we are. And so unless we do something to build a better relationship, unless we find the 1 second of strength, I have a friend named Tanner Clark who talks about his 1 second of strength. Unless we find that 1 second of strength to separate ourselves from it for just a minute, then we're in trouble. Now, the problem is, if you look at any kind of habit formation, we can get in, if you'd like, on addiction versus habit. Any kind of habit formation, it's James Clear in Atomic Habits says it's cue, craving, response, reward. So you need that cue, that visual cue, and then you respond by saying putting your phone away. And then our thesis for us is that you need some kind of reward system that helps build in that habit to it. And so unless we're doing that awareness, we all get our screen time reports on Sunday that says, we were up 400% this week or whatever it is. So by being aware of it, that's not actionable though. So we actually need a system. So I agree. I hope the next generation does a better job, but we can't just hope that they're more aware of it and so they'll do better. We got to equip ourselves with better tools and build in some of those practices.
So I want to get your thoughts on this because I've gone through my own, just like we all have, relationship with my phone, and for a while I was living in an RV. I was living in this old '97 Ford Starflight, and I got a lot better at writing during that time because I didn't have a TV. All I had were books, and I would just lock my phone in the cupboard. And I would sit down. I would set a timer, and I would say I need to write for a 90-minute period, and I can't get up for that 90-minute period. I still do that as a writing exercise.
That's awesome.
I feel like I got that little hack from Neil Gaiman, who's one of the best writers in the fucking world. But he will just sit in the chair and he tells himself that either he can do nothing or he can write.
Wow.
But he can't get up from that chair for a certain period of time. And I find that if I do that in the morning without checking my phone, I'm able to manage my relationship with my phone better for the rest of the day.
Interesting.
So it's like if I can just win that hour in the morning, then I can turn it on and I don't feel the same craving to check it throughout the day. But if I wake up and I'm in bed and I check my phone, or I wake up and the first thing I do is take a shit and I'm scrolling or checking text right then, it's almost like it sets my brain on this weird tempo that it feels it needs to stay on for the rest of the day. And I was wondering if you've experienced anything like that.
Sure. I mean, it's just craving that, that next bite of cotton candy, right? And so it totally is.
Yeah, and like cotton candy, it dissolves as soon as it hits your tongue.
God, look how you just played right off that. That was really good. I like that. No, for sure. I mean, that's one of the, we talk about at RO how if you can protect 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, the AM and PM, that's an amazing day. I find during the day I need my phone a bunch because with work I do need my phone a bunch. Our phones are great, but 6 o'clock when I wake up to 9 o'clock, whether I wake up and you meditate or you read or you journal or whatever that is, or you start the day off right, and then at night again as a dad, those are the valuable hours that we have. 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock. There was a guy who's a customer of ours who I was talking with, and he said this is the number one 35-year-old dad problem in the country right here, and he talked about that 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock p.m. that we have to protect. So I totally relate to that. It does set me in a bad pattern, and if I can, to your point, on both of those, just build that environment on both sides of that. That makes I start the day right, but then I go to bed feeling like, I did a pretty good job. Okay, that feels pretty good. My kids know that I love them. I was totally focused on them. And it could freaking be watching an episode of Ted Lasso as a family. It doesn't have to be like, reading, books of poetry or something together. It can be sitting and watching a family movie without a second screen, whatever that may be. But it totally is, because then I'm actually aligned with the things that I want, with the person that I want to be.
Yeah. You said environment shapes us so much more than willpower. Yeah. And it makes me think how when you're on your phone, you are psychologically putting yourself in a new environment that right now doesn't have many regulations around it. So if you go to Las Vegas, there is a casino strip, and then there's residential neighborhoods. Yeah. There's no casinos in the residential areas because the city planning has deemed that if you had a casino right next to the park, wouldn't be the best for human health, right? And we're always trying to make these decisions, and that's why you should vote and participate in your communities, because it's shaping the future of spaces. Yeah. And right now, there's not much oversight over the spaces that we're engaging in, right? Yeah. The only incentive for you while you're on Instagram is to keep you on site as long as possible. Right. So it's like you probably know this just from learning about digital addiction, but like the scroll down button, that little pause before your feed reloads gives you just enough time for cortisol to rise and then a dopamine hit to rise. And it was the same, it was structured from the slot machine timing. Yeah. So I think that there are a lot of parallels between
for sure
between casinos and shaping our spaces.
And by the way, I kind of alluded to it earlier. If you're in discussion with your partner or even a friend, that can't compete with the intermittent rewards of what's going to come up next when I swipe down. It can't compete with that if you're looking at it purely on a dopamine level. You know what I mean? Because if I'm in a conversation with my wife, it could be really freaking boring. We could be talking about like kids, plan for the next week and sports and who's driving whom. That's not interesting or fun, right? It's necessary, but it's not interesting or fun. And there's no way that can compete for either us, my wife or me. There's no way that can compete with what's coming up next on Instagram. What did Kim K put out on Insta right, this time or whatever it is. But in doing that, that's where we're hijacking the people we want to become, and then the intentions we have for our lives. And I'm just talking about really, Kyle, just like in that moment. Mm-hmm. I'm not necessarily suggesting that scrolling Instagram at 6 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock at night is a bad thing if that's what you want to be doing. But if you are having, hey, here's what I want to do with my time right now, that's probably not the thing you want to do. But again, that's a hard thing to say no to.
I don't know, man. I think you should have your marketing strategy just be like, fucking blow up your phone.
Everybody's doing that's the thing.
Blow up your phone.
Well, that's the thing. Everybody's doing it, and it's not realistic. It's not something that any of us are going to abide by. You can go get a dumb phone right now, but you know what you can't do? Order an Uber or get DoorDash, or there's a bunch of stuff you can't do if you blow up your phone. So we need our phones, and so we have to build in. We're gonna have this. I've just accepted this fact that we're going to have our phones, and we got to build a good relationship with them, because that's the issue with it right now.
There was an artist who did this really brilliant expose of people in different parts of the world staring at their phones, but he superimposed the phone out. That's so they were just dully gazing at their hand. And I think that you should do something like that, man. I think that your whole Instagram feed could just be people dully staring at their hands.
We've played with some things. We had a great, there's a comedian by the name of Andrew Stanley. He's out of Atlanta. He's super, super funny. And he had written a commercial draft for us. And one of them was, the personifying our phones. And so, one scene was a guy and a girl sitting on a couch. The guy's about to make his move, and then the phone pops up in the middle, just a cartoon-looking phone, saying, "The Colorado Rockies are leading the Philadelphia Phillies 6-3 in the 7th inning," and just keep with all the just in the middle of all these things. And so there's a bunch you can do there, just like that, because we do look ridiculous. I look ridiculous. I forget what I ran into the other day. I ran into like a building looking at my phone while I was walking, and this is all I freaking think about. You know what I mean? And so it is ridiculous, and it is funny. And it is, again, Mudwater does a better job than anybody of the jester archetype, just pointing out with humor a truth. And I think everybody can feel it. And then it's not effective. Because when you say to somebody, hey, put up your phone, like back off.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? But if we make fun of ourselves, there's a bunch we can do there for that.
Yeah. That's what has it been like? Have you been in marketing before this job?
No, I was actually in commercial real estate for 15 years.
Oh, you were?
And so my business partner, Heath Wilson, he co-founded a financial tech company that he sold about 4 or 5 years ago to NASDAQ, did real well in the sale. He was retired for 45 days, and then his wife said, "You are driving me freaking nuts. Like, either go golfing or do something else." And so he texted me and he said, "Hey, listen, I got an idea. Let's talk about it." And it was all around this. We've noticed that people out there we're all hooked on our phones, and especially with our kids coming into phone age, what can we do about it?
Yeah. I think that that's common for people who, they quote unquote win. They win the game, and then they're like, wait, I'm now just floating. I'm
right.
not engaged in anything.
Yeah.
I think that, the amount of people that become very sad when they retire makes you question that whole idea that you should just like, cool, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to retire. And that's not to say that you should have to grind your whole life. I hope that people can attain enough wealth to have work be more of a choice, or they get to work on things that they're more passionate about. But I think that engaging with your skills is like, it's so gratifying for people.
For sure. I think it was, I don't know if he's controversial or not, Jordan Peterson has said, like, as an archetype, like, a hero always carries a weight. Like, so you have to be carrying some kind of weight. And so that life of leisure, there's really, we talked about fame a little bit earlier. It's one of those things. It's not that great. I don't think that the carrying a weight is a much better thing, even though it sucks a lot of the time. It's still a great thing. Yeah.
Well, there's also the it's like there's this hedonistic creep, first of all. So you become comfortable with whatever surroundings you're in. And then I think the second is that you, God, I just lost my train of thought. We thrive on hardship.
Yes.
Right. And that's what makes the dopamine truly satisfying.
Yeah.
What we can't handle is feeling unnecessary.
Yeah.
And that's what modern society is very good at, is making people feel unnecessary. And I think that that's the existential crisis that a lot of people feel when they quit their jobs.
Yeah.
Or lose their jobs too. Super high suicide rates, particularly among men who lose their jobs. Because you lose this feeling of feeling necessary in society. Right. That's super important, whether or not it's coming from your job or coming from volunteer work or community service. Like, dude, do that selfishly for your mental health.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Engage in some way.
Yeah, exactly. My dad just retired after working for years, and that's one of the things that he's thinking about is, how do I continue to stay engaged and productive and proactive in what I'm doing? Because that's not a great thing whenever even as stressful as a job could be, at least it's something that you have a very clear focus on what your objective is. And that's a powerful thing. We talked earlier about just this notion, you said as a creative, just this notion of futility, you know what I mean? And that's, even going back to World War II and the concentration camps, it was carry this rock from this fence to that fence.
Right, that was the worst form of torture,
exactly.
right?
And then carry it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's right. Yeah, exactly. So that feeling of futility, that is a brutal, brutal thing.
It's funny. I've thought about this a lot recently, in terms of how much of my work is only exists digitally. I was looking at a Google folder titled editorial, and I realized that 2 years of work exists primarily in that folder.
Wow.
And it's all of the shit that I write for Mudwater. It's all right there in that folder. And I think that for me, doing things physically, accomplishing things physically is very important. We also we did a newspaper that we're going to bring back, the Trends of Benefits newspaper.
That's cool.
And it's funny because I was holding this newspaper and I'm like, I can smell it. I helped make this. It's tangible. Yeah. And I think that's another thing about phone addiction, where you're creating this stuff digitally, but it disappears. And you go back and you look at an old Instagram post that didn't do super well.
Yeah.
That's not like looking back at an old newspaper that you helped write, or a house that you helped build, or anything physical. You don't have the same past relationship to it as you would building something in the real world.
There's something that the concept of tactility, I think, is really important. And for us, the thesis is we should, because 91% of us have our phones with us at all times, let's create some distance. And so literally we've created a physical place where your phone goes. And I think that's really important. And it does go back to the habit loop, that visual cue, seeing something, touching something. It changes how you're able to create a habit. If you do it just with software on your phone or the screen time report, let's try to bring my screen, it doesn't really work. So you have to, and again, we say the solution can't be located inside the problem. Solution can't be located inside the problem. And so that's why a physical place where your phone goes, I think, is really, really important. And then you pair that with some software and you use some of those tools and tricks that the tech companies are using is to keep our eyes on the screen. We're trying to use those things to get them off the screen. But I do think that the notion of something physical is a really, really powerful thing.
So you have the physical product that's coming out soon. You put your phone in there, and then there is an app that will immediately track how long it's been in there.
Yeah, exactly. You drop it. You don't have to tap anything. You don't have to plug in anything. You literally drop it in. It knows when Kyle's phone has gone in, and it starts tracking the time away. And so then instead of seeing how much time you've been on your phone, it'll show you how much time you've been off your phone. And it creates a gamified experience. It gamifies the experience of being away from your phone. And we all know there's nothing that gratifying about being away from your phone. What's really gratifying, the reward at the end of that, again, back to the cue, craving, response, reward, the habit loop, the reward is not you being away from your phone. The reward is, what did you do with your time when you were away from your phone? Like, what did that life look like?
Yeah.
Is it spearfishing? Is it reading poetry? Is it hanging out with a friend? Is it exploring a thought, just like a feeling?
I was just going to say masturbating to your own thoughts.
That's exactly right.
Fucking breakthrough.
Just like middle school.
That's
again,
what you're really doing, man. You're helping men use the power of imagination.
We've lost it, right?
Yeah.
It's all at our fingertips.
I mean,
now.
We love our phones so much, we're literally jerking off to them. You changed the world, man.
You changed the world. Imagine that.
One hand at a time.
Imagine all the cool stuff you can imagine again.
Dude, seriously though, just the power of imagination is something that I'm sure you've noticed, like having time away from your phone, having that piece of paper, needing to think through a problem. Man, it's a freaking muscle.
It's a challenge to not look up everything immediately.
Right.
You know what I mean? I try to encourage that in my kids. Well, no, let's think about it. Can we think? Do we know who we're big baseball fans and Atlanta Braves fans. Like, who did lead the Braves in home runs last year? Like, actually thinking about that as opposed to just looking it up immediately. And that's just a dumb example, but there's a bunch you can do. Like, when you start tapping into that powerful muscle you have, it can create some powerful stuff.
I just read this book. You probably read it. It's called Breath. It's great. It's by James Nestor. It's all about breathing. It's all about the history of breathing, and it's all about nose breathing. How it's much better for you to breathe through your nose. But there's this term that has been coined that he talks about called email apnea. So it's so common now that people are they're emailing, they're scrolling their phones, they're just context shifting between digital devices so much that their breath will get really shallow and high in their chest.
Wow.
And then sometimes they'll go long periods of time without breathing at all. And like sleep apnea, it'll sound like the person's died, and then they'll. But we do that now in waking life because we're so distracted.
That's terrifying, isn't it? And just think of the toll that puts on you. I mean, they talk about sleep apnea, the toll it puts on your heart, and like all the conditions that can come from that. And that we're doing that during the day. Wow.
Yeah, man. You're also probably helping people breathe more deeply.
Yeah.
Shallow breathing is very much associated with scrolling.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you just can't. I mean, you can't. And I actually liken the. A lot of the Mudwater talks about a lot of the psychedelics and like the stuff that opens up creativity and helps combat depression and anxiety. Like that's all this stuff too. You know what I mean? And so even if someone has an intention, let me think if I can say this well. If someone said, I want to be more creative, or I don't want to be so anxious, it would be similar to carrying a boulder and trying to run a marathon. You could probably do it. You probably could. But it'd be but running a marathon, even without a boulder, is really, really hard. You know what I mean? And so here we are trying to be mindful and present and reduce anxiety and be creative while we have this thing that's just continuing to ping us. Hey, Kyle, hey, Kyle, hey, Kyle, hey, Kyle. It's just yelling at us all the time. And so until we actually put that down, it's not like we can do any of these things. We probably can, but you just make them a lot harder to do things that are already really difficult.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That may have been
No, it does. I think this is probably controversial, but I think that people with super high IQs can handle digital addiction better.
That's probably right.
I've noticed like the smartest people I know, people who you're like, whoa, bro, you are on another planet.
Yeah. Hey, I'm right here. You don't have to.
Yeah. Sorry. I just like talking about you in the third person because you're so smart.
Clearly.
I think that they have a better. I've just seen a couple of them like be able to navigate it better without getting sucked in. Moi, on the other hand,
me too.
I really feel like I need all the help I can get. And that's, speaking personally, like I started reading and writing at a pretty late age. I was not a little bookworm when I was a kid. I was into watching movies, hanging with friends, surfing. And then I just realized along the way that I couldn't focus on anything for a long period of time. I was super distracted. And everyone who I wanted to be like was a big reader and they knew how to write. And I was like, shit, I think that there's something to this.
Yeah.
So I just started like chipping away at those habits.
Yeah.
And I think that as far as habit building goes, you can't be on your phone when you're habit building. And this is there's a lot of science around this. Andrew Huberman talks about the science of learning and that feeling of frustration when you're learning something new is acetylcholine. It's a chemical in your brain that gives way to neuroplasticity. So that feeling of like, fuck, I can't get this right now, but I really want to, is what allows your brain to change. And if you look throughout history, it was the stakes that allowed us to learn, right? So if you didn't care about something, you weren't going to learn it. But in prehistory, there were big stakes attached to just staying alive, right? So you're like, this is the body of water. It's down this path. And that's what he recommends when you're learning something new. Like if you're reading a book, fully engage in why you're going to read that book. Like the why, even before you start reading, is really important for long-term retention. For example, really I'm reading this book because I want to retain this information. Just thinking that thought will help you retain the information. And if you're doing that in some kind of fractured state of consciousness while scrolling your phone, you're not going to learn.
Right. I totally believe that. And I'm interested in how, and I'm one of the low IQ guys. I probably have the lowest IQ in this room, but it's interesting how the mind believes that.
I was thinking of a funny comeback right there, and I was like, shit. And then I said nothing, so now I feel like an asshole. I was thinking about everyone. Here it is. Well, there are some idiots watching this.
There you go. Yeah,
there you go.
You got
That's
it.
what I was looking for. But it took me a while to get that.
But you nailed it. I mean, here we are. You nailed it. And you could probably edit out like the pause where it's like super quick after. Yeah. So I think that it's interesting to me what our minds listen to.
We love you, everyone who's listening, by the way.
We love you, Mom and Dad.
I think you're geniuses.
What our minds will listen to and we tell them. So to your point, like and I tell my kids this, like your mind will believe what your mouth says. Like it'll just say it and it'll believe it. Like to your point, like I'm reading this because, and then it just activates a certain part of your mind and says, okay, I'm going to do that. But to your point, if you can't get into that state, not even a focus, like the term RO, which is our company name, means to notice. And we haven't even gotten, we can't focus until we notice first, right? And so that initial feeling of notice, like, oh, I gotta begin with some kind of intention and notice, like, okay, this is why I'm reading this book. And then when you do that, our minds will then believe it, and it becomes almost like a cycle. It's like it becomes self-fulfilling. You know what I mean? Yeah.
You made me think of a buddy of mine. His name's Chris Ryan. I mentioned him earlier in the podcast. Real big thinker, and I one time asked him, I was like, what do you think your purpose is, man? And he just kind of, he's like, sometimes I feel like it's just to notice more.
Wow.
I'm like, that's pretty damn good, man.
That's good.
That's good.
What if we did?
Yeah.
Honestly, think about that. Think about if, I had a few years ago, there's a guy I worked with, and I passed him in the hall. And I was like, hey, Robert, what's up? And he's like, oh, hey, Joey. And it was normal. And then it was just something felt a little wrong. I went to his office, like, I said, hey, man, like, just noticed something was a little bit off. Are you okay? And he starts crying. He said, my wife served me papers today. But what if we got in that posture in the morning? We said, I'm just going to notice what's going on around me. I'm just going to feel like the emotional temperature in the room when I go in. That could be amazingly powerful. Imagine. How about once a day we notice something we wouldn't have otherwise noticed? Whether it's a feeling in ourselves. You told a great story earlier about this, this fight you had with your friend, and then you explored that feeling, and then you noticed that your feelings were hurt. And then that led to this beautiful moment with your friend that really galvanized the two of you together even more so. But without that, if we medicate and deaden ourselves, then we don't get to that point. We're missing a whole lot of stuff, I
sure do know. Yeah. And I think that there are I think that adding practices like that are what can create that kind of mental training, right? Like you're not just going to say, I'm going to go get fit today at the gym.
Right.
You're going to work on barbells. You're going to work on squats. You're going to work on sprints. Like there are these little ways to train to gain better overall fitness. But I think that when we talk about mental training, people just don't realize that your brain physically changes depending on the thoughts that you think.
Right.
That's a fucking crazy concept
100%.
To really entertain.
Yeah.
And there's a guy named Rick Hansen. He wrote a book called Neurodharma, as well as a few others. But he's this really great blend between neuroscience and meditation. And he talks about how if you go on some epic rock climb and you learn some new moves, and then you get down and you spend 5 minutes meditating on how epic that rock climb was, your brain will change as a result of it. There are neural pathways that are grooving their way into you, and that's ultimately the person that you're going to become. So I just think that even, I think that the work that you're doing is giving way to this conversation of mental training and young people starting to see their minds like an instrument they would similarly see their bodies.
Yeah.
This is the kind of mental training I'm going to do today. And it could be as simple as I'm going to go on a walk around the block. I'm going to notice one thing that I never noticed before. I'm going to write that down. And learning a few of these techniques, it really does determine the trajectory and your potential in life.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing for me that I've noticed is just like grazing information, and how often I'll just graze, whether it's an article online, even whether it's just a book, without being like, oh, this is why I'm going to read right now. I'll just start reading, then I'll finish, and I can't recall one thing that's
Right.
happened from that. I'm like, fuck, why did I even read?
Right, exactly.
And whereas one thing that I've started to do, like with breath, is I'll read the book, I'll have a highlighter, I'll highlight in the book, and then I will type up the notes from that book into a folder that I have, which is great because you can go back
Right.
and check it out, but I'm engaging with the information in a different way. And if you engage with it a few different times, then you can actually own it as part of your body of knowledge.
My suspicion is even if you never went back and reviewed that folder ever, it still did tremendous things for you just by highlighting, then typing it. You know, it's like you read it, even, what do they say? Like, it's like you read, you hear, you say, you type or something. Like you can get that information, multiple different inputs and outputs of it. That's when it really, really becomes sticky. So I believe that even if you didn't go look at the folder, I bet you it still had a bunch of value.
Yeah. So what would you say? So is the product launched, or you have pre-orders?
Yeah, pre-orders.
Okay.
We're actually probably, by the time this airs, it'll probably be live and we'll be shipping.
Okay.
So yeah, it's right upon us.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, it's fun.
That's cool. And what are the biggest challenges that you're up against right now in growing your company?
I mean, one of the big ones is that it's not a throwaway item. I mean, it's $300, and it's, people look at it like, I'm paying $300 for a box. Well, it's a smart box. It's got a bunch of technology in it that makes it easy to put down your phone. So it's almost like the prerequisite to this is someone has to feel a tension inside themselves that says, you know what, I need some help. I need, and making an investment in it is a good thing for them. And then the other part, there's a $10 a month subscription component to it as well. And getting people to understand, like, why am I subscribing to a box when it's actually similar to a Whoop band or an Oura ring or something like that, where there's there's dynamic software in the app and experience and data and all that kind of stuff that goes into it that you're fed, that helps you, one thing, have a skin in the game, and two, keeps that dynamic to where you really do build that habit sustainably over time. And so the people who feel that poignantly are, sign me up. But again, we're introducing something brand new, which is really, really fun. That's a challenge is people understanding, how can this benefit me in a way that the value exceeds the cost? And I know the answer is drastically, but just preaching that message is kind of fun and interesting.
Yeah, figuring out what your story is and how to best tell that story.
Exactly.
Is
you know about that?
Yeah, I mean it's all storytelling, man.
Yeah.
Whether advertising, building a business, writing a book. It's just figuring out how you can reach the people who need to hear that story.
Yeah.
And that's really that's the thing that I've always thought of, just as a creative, right? It's like you don't need to reach everyone.
Yeah.
You just, if you reach 1,000 people and they each pay you $100, you're making $100,000 a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Wow, doesn't seem insurmountable now.
Exactly.
It's just figuring out who they are and where they are.
Yeah. Exactly.
And how you can tell that story to them efficiently. Well, I really commend you for creating a product that's allowing us to tread towards better attention and deeper attention. I really believe that is all that we have, and it is largely dependent on us gaining a better relationship with our technology so that we can go out and do the kind of shit that we really want to do.
Yeah.
And paying for something that will allow you to finally fucking pursue spearfishing or guitar lessons or this or that.
Yeah.
And actually placing value on it is a smart thing to do, man. So I wish you the best with it.
Thank you. We all know it. Our time here is short, and not just on the podcast, in general on the earth. I mean, it is. And I think Mudwater even did something like that. Well, why is that important? Why is that? You keep asking, why is it important? It gets down to because we're going to die someday, right? And we got to make the most of what we have right now, whether that's for ourselves, for the people around us, for the world, whatever that is. Our time is short, and so it's important to me, to us, to all be reminded of that all the time. Like, go make the most of it. You know what I mean? And this thing is not a real reflection of real life. We say we're for less screen time and more real life. And, how can we tap into that? It's a pretty powerful thing if we do, even if it's just those little moments at a time.
Yeah. Joey, man, thanks so much
Thanks,
for coming
Kyle.
out. And where can people find you or reach out to you?
Go to goaro.com, GOARO.com, or on Instagram @GoAroNow.
Nice, man. Pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, brother. Enjoyed it.